How do you face the man who shattered your world? Alina Vesper's ex-husband, Adrian Vale, cast her aside for a glamorous model, believing he'd left her broken and forgotten. He's about to make his grand entrance at the social event of the season, ready to flaunt his perfect new life. But he's forgotten one small detail. Alina. And she's not just coming back. She's arriving pregnant with his secret child and on the arm of a reclusive billionaire who holds Adrian's future in the palm of his hand. This isn't just revenge. It's a reckoning. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The reflection staring back at Alina Vesper from the rain-streaked window of her small apartment wasn't the woman she recognized, but a ghost. A ghost of a life she once lived. A life of sun-drenched afternoons on the Amalfi Coast, and the hollow clink of champagne glasses at galas that blurred into one another. That woman had been Mrs. Adrian Vale, a title that had felt both like a shield and a cage. Now she was just Alina. And Alina was tired. Her bones ached with a weariness that had nothing to do with the pregnancy she was hiding from the world and everything to do with the man who had put it there. 6 months. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, a clean, surgical cut that had severed their 7-year marriage with the cold precision of Adrian's ambition. He had called it conscious uncoupling, a term he'd picked up from a lifestyle blog, as if their shared history was a trendy piece of furniture they had mutually decided to discard. But there was nothing conscious about the way he had systematically dismantled her piece by piece until she was a stranger in her own skin. He had told her she was too emotional, too needy, that her quiet nature didn't fit the dynamic image he needed to project as one of New York's most aggressive real estate developers. He needed a powerhouse, he'd said, a statement piece. He had found one in Vivienne Marie, a model whose face was currently plastered on a billboard in Times Square, selling perfume with a smoldering gaze that promised a world of excitement Alina had never been able to offer. It was through Instagram, the modern-day town square for public humiliation, that Alina had learned of their engagement. A picture of Vivienne's hand, slender and manicured, adorned with a diamond so large it looked obscene, her ring finger intertwined with Adrian's. The caption read, "A new chapter with my king." I said, yes. The post had been a dagger to the heart, not because she still loved Adrian. That love had died a slow, painful death long before the papers were signed. But because of the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it. He hadn't even had the decency to tell her himself. He had simply moved on, erasing her as if she were a rough draft of a life he was now perfecting with a new, upgraded model. The comments section was a sea of fawning congratulations from his sycophantic circle, the same people who had once called Alina their friend. They gushed about how perfect Adrian and Vivienne were together, how they were a power couple, a term that made Alina's stomach churn. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, a gentle, protective gesture. The small, burgeoning curve was the only thing that was truly hers, a secret, a complication, a tiny fluttering heartbeat that was both a blessing and a terrifying burden. She had found out 2 weeks after Adrian had left, the irony so bitter it had made her laugh until she cried. He had always been ambivalent about children, claiming they were a distraction, a lifestyle anchor that would slow him down. He didn't want to be tied down. And now here she was, tied to him in the most irrevocable way possible, and he had no idea. Her apartment, a cozy one-bedroom in a pre-war building in the West Village, was her sanctuary. It was a world away from the sterile glass-and-chrome penthouse she had shared with Adrian, a place that had always felt more like a showroom than a home. Here, the walls were lined with books, the furniture was soft and worn, and the air smelled of old paper and the lemon tea she drank to soothe her morning sickness. It was small, but it was hers, paid for with the modest settlement Adrian's lawyers had deemed generous. It was just enough to keep her from being destitute, but not enough to maintain the life he had taught her to lead. It was, she knew, a calculated move. He wanted her gone, but not so far gone that she might become a problem. He wanted her to disappear quietly. Tonight was the annual Starlight Gala, a glittering charity event that was the crown jewel of the New York social season. She and Adrian had attended every year of their marriage. It was a night of performance, of networking disguised as philanthropy, a stage where Adrian shone his brightest. She knew he would be there with Vivian, parading her like a trophy. The thought of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through her, and this time it had nothing to do with the baby. A notification lit up her phone screen. It was an email from the event organizers, a generic reminder about the gala. Her name was still on the list, a forgotten relic of her past life. She had been about to delete it when an idea, small and dangerous, began to take root in her mind. Why should she be the one to hide? Why should she be the one to shrink into the shadows while he celebrated his new life on the ashes of their old one? The power imbalance had always been the unspoken third party in their marriage. He was the sun, and she was expected to be a pale, reflecting moon. He had controlled the money, the friends, the narrative. He had convinced her that she was nothing without him, that her quiet strength was a weakness. But the past 6 months of solitude had taught her otherwise. She had started painting again, her canvases filling with the vibrant colors that had been muted for so long. She had reconnected with old friends, the ones who had known her before Adrian, the ones who saw her not as an accessory, but as Alina. And then there was the baby. This tiny, secret life growing inside her had ignited a fierce, protective instinct she never knew she possessed. It wasn't just about her anymore. She had to be strong for them. She looked at her reflection again, but this time she saw something different. Not a ghost, but a woman on the edge of a transformation. The weariness was still there, but underneath it, a flicker of defiance. He wanted her to disappear. Fine. But first, she would make him see her, really see her not as the timid wife he had discarded, but as the woman and the mother she was becoming. She opened her closet, pushing past the sensible, muted clothes she had adopted to please him. At the very back, wrapped in a garment bag, was a dress she had bought on a whim in Paris, a deep emerald green silk that shimmered like a jewel. Adrian had hated it. Too ostentatious, he had declared. It draws too much attention. A slow smile touched Alina's lips. Perfect, she whispered to the empty room. She would go to the gala. She wouldn't cause a scene. She wouldn't cry or scream. She would simply appear, a ghost from his past, walking into his perfect future. And she wouldn't be alone. She would have her secret, her strength, her emerald green dress, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulatory chatter. It was a place where fortunes were flaunted, alliances were forged, and reputations were made or broken over a glass of vintage champagne. For Adrian Vale, it was his natural habitat. He stood near the grand staircase, a king surveying his court. At his side, Vivian Marie was a vision in crimson, a stark, fiery contrast to the cool tones of the ballroom. The dress, a couture creation that clung to her statuesque frame like a second skin, was cut daringly low, showcasing the diamond necklace Adrian had gifted her that morning. It was a statement, just like Vivian herself. She was his ultimate acquisition, the living embodiment of his success. "Darling, you're staring," Vivian murmured, her voice a low, throaty purr. She ran a perfectly manicured finger down the lapel of his Tom Ford tuxedo. "Is someone more interesting than me in the room?" Adrian forced a smile, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Never, my love. Just ensuring everything is perfect." He was a man obsessed with perfection, with control. Every detail of his life was curated, from the art on his walls to the woman on his arm. Tonight was the culmination of a 6-month campaign to rebrand himself. The messy divorce from the mousy, unassuming Alina Vesper was a distant memory, a footnote in the story of his ascent. Vivian was the new, thrilling chapter. Adrian, there you are, a voice boomed. It was Charles Thorne, a contemporary in the real estate world, a man whose respect Adrian craved. Charles was old money, but he admired Adrian's new money ruthlessness. And the lovely Vivian. You two are the talk of the town. That ring, Vivian purred, extending her hand for Charles to admire. Adrian has exquisite taste, she said, her eyes flicking to Adrian, a silent reminder of her value. He certainly does, Charles agreed, his gaze lingering on Vivian a moment too long. Big night for you, Adrian. I hear the final bids for the Hudson Yards project are due next week. Rumor is you're the front-runner. We're confident, Adrian said, his voice smooth as polished marble. It was the biggest deal of his career, a legacy-defining project that would cement his place at the top of the New York real estate food chain. Everything was riding on it. His public image, his relationship with Vivian, his entire future, it was all tied to this deal. The conversation drifted to market trends and zoning laws, a language Adrian spoke with fluent, predatory grace. Vivian, for her part, played the role of the adoring fiancée perfectly, nodding at the right moments, her smile never faltering. But beneath the surface, she was bored. This world of men talking about money was a means to an end. The end was the lifestyle, the security, the envy of other women. She had climbed her way out of a working-class neighborhood in Queens, using her face and her body as currency. Adrian Vale was her biggest score yet, and she had no intention of losing him. As Adrian held court, his mind drifted unbidden to Alina. He felt a pang of something he refused to name, not guilt, but an annoying, lingering inconvenience. He had expected her to crawl into a hole and disappear. He had paid her off, washed his hands of her, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling of a loose thread. Their last conversation had been sterile, conducted through lawyers. He had never had to face the raw, human cost of his decision. He had simply moved on. He remembered her in this ballroom 2 years ago. She had worn a simple navy dress, elegant but understated. She had spent most of the night by the dessert table, talking to one of the waiters about his family in Ecuador. She had a way of connecting with people, a genuine warmth that he had once found endearing and later suffocating. It was a quality that had no value in his world. It was a liability. Is everything all right, Adrian? Vivian asked, her voice sharp, cutting through his reverie. You seem a million miles away. Just thinking about the deal, he lied smoothly, taking a sip of his champagne. The pressure is immense. Well, you have me to help you relax later, she whispered, her hand sliding from his arm down to the small of his back, a possessive, promising gesture. It was then that a subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. A ripple of whispers started near the entrance, spreading like a wave through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations paused. Adrian, his senses attuned to the social currents of the room, felt it instantly. A new player had entered the game. He followed the line of sight of the other guests, and his blood ran cold. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, bathed in the light of the chandeliers, was Alina Vesper. But it wasn't the Alina he remembered. The mousy, apologetic woman who seemed to shrink in on herself was gone. In her place stood a queen. The emerald green dress was a slash of vibrant, defiant color in the sea of muted tones. It clung to her curves, curves that were fuller, more womanly than he remembered. Her hair, which she used to pull back in a severe bun, cascaded over her shoulders in soft, honey-blonde waves. Her face, free of the heavy makeup he had always insisted she wear, was luminous, her eyes clear and bright. She looked powerful. For a heart-stopping moment, Adrian couldn't breathe. It was as if a ghost had walked into the room, but a ghost more vibrant and alive than anyone there. Vivian stiffened beside him, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his arm. Who is that? She hissed, her voice laced with venom. Adrian couldn't answer. He was transfixed. Alina's eyes swept across the room, a calm, unhurried survey. She wasn't looking for him. She didn't seem to be looking for anyone. She was simply arriving. And then he saw who was with her. Descending the stairs just behind her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, was Gabriel Ashford. Not Charles Thorne, the real estate contemporary, but his uncle, the Gabriel Ashford, the reclusive, enigmatic billionaire who had built an empire designing and selling private jets to the world's elite. A man so wealthy and powerful he made Adrian look like a small-time landlord. Gabriel Ashford didn't attend social events. He didn't court the press. He was a legend, a myth, a man who operated in a stratosphere so far above Adrian's it was barely conceivable. And he was with Alina. The sight was a physical blow. Adrian felt the air leave his lungs, the carefully constructed facade of his perfect life cracking under the weight of this single, impossible image. Alina, his discarded, forgotten ex-wife, was not just here. She was here with a man who could ruin him with a single phone call. The power imbalance, the one he had so carefully cultivated and exploited in his marriage, had just been flipped on its head in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. The whispers in the room grew louder, turning from curious to frenzied. Who was she? What was she doing with Gabriel Ashford? Adrian could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, the collective gaze of the world he had worked so hard to conquer. They were all waiting to see what he would do. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Vale had no idea. The king was in his castle, but his fortress had just been breached, and the ghost of his past was about to hold him accountable. Alina's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Each step down the marble staircase felt both terrifyingly slow and dizzyingly fast. The sea of faces below blurred into a kaleidoscope of judgment and curiosity. She could feel their stares, their whispers dissecting her, trying to place her in their rigid social hierarchy. For a moment, the old Alina, the one who would have fled from this kind of attention, threatened to resurface. She faltered, her hand gripping the cold, ornate balustrade. "Easy now," a low, calm voice said from just behind her. "Just breathe. They're more scared of you than you are of them." She glanced over her shoulder at Gabriel Ashford. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at her, his eyes, a surprising shade of warm gray, holding a steady, reassuring calm.